Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Pop Goes the 60s. Today I have a special guest, Lord John Heaton from Belgium. And we are going to be discussing the Paul McCartney Ram album. And this is, John and I got on the phone a couple weeks back and we started to just chat to figure out, well, what could we talk about? Because we wanted to collaborate. And as our discussion progressed, we ended up talking about Ram for like 45 minutes. I said, John said to me, Matt, I think we've got a topic.
Excellent. Hey, just one correction. I'm in Budapest, Hungary, not Belgium.
Oh, I'm sorry, Budapest.
Yeah.
My mistake. Were you in Belgium before? No,
No, no,
you've always
no.
been
Well,
Budapest. Okay,
I've
my
visited
mistake.
Brussels. Yeah.
Okay, I know had a trip recently to England.
Yeah, indeed.
All right. I guess generally this album was originally panned but today it's quite revered, especially by McCartney fans. John, what is your take overall on this album, just as a kind of overview?
I think it's a very decent early effort from Paul. I particularly like his 70s work ahead of the rest of his career. I think it's an improvement on the first solo album. I think it's very professionally made, good musicians. We can talk about Linda when the time comes. Maybe that she's the weak link in the band, but I think he uses her skills pretty effectively on this album.
Hmm.
On the whole, not totally, but on the whole, I just like the fact that it's recorded in New York for the most part in 1970, very close to the Beatles split. I think you can still feel a bit of the Beatle magic coming out on this album.
Yeah, I guess Paul McCartney, here's a quote from him saying, I was going through a bad time, what I suspect was almost a nervous breakdown. So that's what he said about the recording of this album. And as you just said, this was really right after the Beatles. Things started getting ugly. And obviously it shows up in the lyrics here. And I guess I wanted to start by going through some of the contemporary criticism of this record, because it was completely savaged. And
Yeah.
I think we can put that in a little perspective now. Let me read a couple of these here. Now, McCartney was hurt by these reviews because he was really playing to the critics here. And the first album wasn't critically revered very well either. And I think he tried to overcompensate with this album, but it didn't work for him. So Rolling Stone, our favorites, John Landau called Ram incredibly inconsequential and monumentally irrelevant, criticized its lack of intensity and energy. He added that it exposes McCartney as having benefited immensely from collaboration with the Beatles, particularly John Lennon. So that's one. Playboy accused McCartney of substituting facility for any real substance and compared it to watching someone juggling 5 guitars. It's fairly impressive, but you keep wondering why he bothers. NME, Alan Smith, further called it an excursion into almost unrelieved tedium and the worst thing Paul McCartney has ever done. And Robert Christgau of the Village Voice called it a bad record, a classic form content mismatch, and felt that McCartney succumbed to conspicuous consumption by overworking himself and obscenely producing a style of music meant to be soft and whimsical. So, I mean, it goes on. There are other bad ones as well, but I don't know what they were expecting of him. I really don't know, but clearly this album is better than the first album. I think it's far better than the third album. So I think he really not only it doesn't seem to me like he was trying too hard. I think it has a lot of the whimsy of this record. It seems to be more homespun. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think? It doesn't seem to be overly saccharine to me at all.
Well, just going back to your earlier point, what were people expecting? I think people were expecting Abbey Road, period. I mean,
Uh,
and they didn't get it. Maybe they got a bits and pieces reminiscent of Abbey Road, like Backseat of My Car. The melody is just gorgeous and quite Beatley. I think this album is a mixture of homeliness and love, family and love, and also quite a bit of angst. Pretty much directed at John Lennon. I know Paul has only ever owned up to one to one line being aimed at John. Too many people going underground or preaching practices. But if you listen to the lyrics of Three Legs, I mean, it's pretty clear that it's aimed at the other Beatles. I know Lennon was paranoid. So I think it's a strange mixture of emotions because of that. So Paul likes to come off, the innocent country guy with the ram on the cover, but actually there's some pretty nasty hidden messages, and not forgetting the dreadful picture of two Beatles copulating on the back cover.
Yeah, that kind of drives the point home, I think. I thought that's, I mean, to me, down to the artwork, I don't think this is lightweight at all, especially with the pictures of those two Beatles on the back. I mean, clearly, that's not lightweight. I mean, I don't know how anybody could miss the point. And McCartney, yeah, he does come out, I wouldn't say out swinging, but I'll talk about this a little later, I guess. McCartney is a little bit more of an on-the-surface writer. I mean, you don't get the depth right up front. So, but anyway, let's look at maybe go track by track here, because I think there's some weak songs on here. I think there's some great songs on here. So the first song is "Too Many People." I guess that gets it off. He pretty much sets the tone with that song.
I think it's a sensational song. I think it's more or less the best song on the album, notwithstanding the lyrics aimed somewhat at Lennon. I love everything about it. The melody, that was your first mistake. You took your lucky break. Gorgeous, and the chorus. I know last time we spoke, you were not too keen on the guitar, and we were trying to work out if it was Paul or Dave Spinoza. I think from listening to it again, I think it's Paul. I think it's Paul playing that first solo. Seems to be more his style, and I don't have a problem with it. I think, it was so refreshing to have a fully produced track after the very laid back McCartney solo album, where virtually every track was underproduced. I think there's a lot more care gone into the production on this album, and it works more often than not.
Yeah, I think this is.
You're going to now say you don't like the track.
Well, this track actually is one of my favorite tracks on the album. I didn't like the ending, that guitar. I think that always bothered me. But that aside, I mean, it's a great rocker, and it would have fit great on Abbey Road. It is very Beatle-y, and I think that it does have some angst with it as well. So this lightweight thing is, I think, just completely. They just had a view of him at the time and just put that view on every review, it seems. So, well, next song, Three Legs. Now I think this is a great little bluesy tune. This is one of my favorites on the album. And you can't, like you said, you can't miss the point of who it's about.
Absolutely. And what do you like Linda's backing vocals on this track?
Not bad. There's some. She seems to fit in well in a couple of the songs, but generally I'm a little surprised he used her in this fashion. But we'll talk about Linda a little bit more later, because I've got a couple general things to say about using her and why he possibly did, and how it kind of goes against the way he produces music, but it's his wife, so. But yeah, I like Three Legs. How about yourself? You like that song?
I think it's completely unique in McCartney's catalogue. I don't think he's done anything like it before or since. It's just a mad song, and I love it. And I love the way it picks up tempo, towards the end. And when I fly above the clouds, you really get a sense of, he is I know we call Band on the Run the Escape album, but there's a little bit of escapism on here as well. Maybe it's escape from London, escape up to Scotland and hang out in the hills kind of thing. And later we'll hear how's the country later. So I think it's a great track.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he's done anything like it since. That blues lick he did, I think that's really sounds great. So, and I would have liked to hear him do more music like that, actually, but he didn't.
Yeah, I was reading that Dave Spinoza actually only on two tracks on here.
Oh, really?
He's on Eat at Home and he's on this track, Three Legs, and he's on the single Another Day. Because what he did is he refused to commit himself because he said he wanted to keep himself available
Mm.
for other artists. I mean, so you imagine how that went down well didn't go down well with Paul. So
Well,
he called in Hugh McCracken, who's on most of the album.
okay. I wonder why McCartney.
So what I'm trying to say is those Hugh McCracken didn't play together. I mean, everyone thinks of there being three guitarists on this album, but I think there was only Paul and either Dave or Paul and Hugh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was listening to the guitar on all the tracks in particular, and to my ears, there's quite a bit of McCartney playing guitar on this record, so I don't know how much the other guys were used. The album doesn't go into track by track details of who played on what, so it's a little hard to tell. But whatever. I think clearly McCartney wanted to have some top players on this record because of the criticism he took on the first album. Speaking of the first album, we have Ram On, which to me is something more like the first album. I thought that this is kind of a throwaway song, and the little ukulele thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
I can see that. Yeah,
it's a little cute.
he did it in concert. He did it in concert a few years ago. It was a wonderful surprise when he just came out with his ukulele and did it.
Mm.
Because we all complain he doesn't do anything from Ram in concert, and he doesn't. And then he pulled out. Suddenly, he was starting to play Another Day, Too Many People, and Ram On, three tracks. And obviously, on the
Okay.
early tours, he was doing quite a few of the other tracks on the early Wings tours.
Mm-hmm. Well, one
Yeah,
track.
no, I like this track. I like the fact that it's on the ukulele. I'm sure George Harrison was a fan of it.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah.
I mean, it's short. It's not nothing major, but it fits well on the album, and I can see why he called the album Ram, because it kind of sums up the whole mood of the album. Ram On, give your heart to somebody right away. I'm not sure what Ram On means really. I mean, it doesn't mean soldier on kind of thing.
Well, that's kind of what I thought. I thought he was just kind of ramming ahead, regardless of what the critics were going to say. And he was kind of a man by himself, and he holed himself up on that farm, and I think he probably felt pretty much alone. He's just going to ram on. So that's how I took it. Now, the next song, Dear Boy, I also think is one of the weaker songs on the album, and I particularly don't care for the lyrics. And was this one supposedly about Linda's ex-husband?
Yeah, it was. Who later sadly committed suicide, but that happened later. I hope it wasn't influenced by this song, but and Lennon thought it was about him. Obviously, I think it's lyrically it's not much, but I think it's gorgeous vocal arrangement. Pretty complicated. You can't imagine George or John doing a vocal arrangement as intricate as this. I think he must have spent a lot of time on this one, and I think it works. I mean, lyrically. It does have a message, as we've discussed, but it's they're not fantastic lyrics. But I have to disagree with you. I love this track.
Well, the next track was the first track I ever heard off this album, and it was always a favorite of mine. That's Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey. Interestingly enough, it was released as a single in the States, but in England, he chose Backseat of My Car for the single, which didn't do too well. Uncle Albert went to #1 over here, and I think it's always been one of his great songs. It's probably the closest he ever got to Abbey Road Again, I would say. And I thought that, I don't know, people seem to like this song, but does he play this live at all?
No, I think it's just a bridge too far in terms of trying to do it live, because it's such a there's so many little bits and pieces in the arrangement, and we now know that George Martin was behind the arrangement for this song, but that only became evident with the archive release. And actually, I don't have the archive release, but apparently in the detailed book, it does say George Martin helped out on this song and on Backseat of My Car, I think it was.
Yeah, I've always liked this song, although I think it gets a little bit
Yeah, I
fruity.
mean, I can't really imagine this song being on a Beatles album without.
Did I lose you, John?
I think my
Oh, okay.
internet is a bit unstable. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah, it is a bit fruity, as you say. Lennon apparently Lennon said he liked the verse bit and he liked the hands across the water, but he didn't like the um, that bit in the middle where hang
Yeah,
around, get your feet back off the ground,
yeah.
live a little,
Put
get around.
put
He didn't like that bit.
put
So
yeah, put the pudding in the pie or whatever. Yeah.
it's one of those. I mean, McCartney's done medleys throughout his career. This has to be one of the most successful.
Yeah, to me it's I like it. It works almost everywhere except for that strange middle that John didn't like either. I'm not a fan of that. And it reminds me of the middle section of Yellow Submarine, but without a John Lennon in there, it doesn't really hold up for it doesn't have enough balls. So it gets a little too fruity, I think, and that's why. But it hit number one, so
Yeah,
fruit sells.
I think that's what Bob Woofenden said in his book, The Beatles Apart. He was trying to repeat the submarine.
Hmm. Yeah, he darn near did it. Now the next song, "Smile Away." That one I'm kind of indifferent to. I noticed the Beach Boy style backing vocals on there, so there's like a kind of a Pet Sounds flavoring to this song, to my ears anyway. What do you think about this one?
I like the vocals. I like Linda's vocals. I don't like much about the song other than that, to be honest. I mean,
Hmm.
I think the lyrics are dreadful. You
Hmm.
know, who'd have thought it would come to this? He's talking about, man, I can smell your breath a mile away, or smell your feet a mile away. It's just,
Yeah, yeah.
it just does nothing for me. And I think even Karen Tyler singled out this track as one of the four best tracks on the album. Well, to me, it's not.
Hmm.
It's one of the weaker tracks.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
one I
it's a
would dump.
rocker, but it's pretty repetitive.
Hmm. Now, starting side two, we've got "Heart of the Country," and this is a good song. I do have a little problem with some of his scat singing at the end of the verses, and this is to me Paul McCartney. I always hear him with a great song, and then he kind of ruins it for me with some of this goofy stuff. And this is where I think people say, okay, John Lennon would have inserted something different there and propping up the song. And to me, that's apparent with "Heart of the Country."
Okay, I have to respectfully disagree with you. I think this is a masterpiece, and I told him so one of the times I met him in '87 as he was
Oh,
walking
really?
away. I said, "Heart of the Country, like that track?" And he go, "Oh, you like that one, do you? Good." Yeah. So I just think this is the most honest song on the record, the most natural. You can actually imagine him getting out his guitar in Scotland and just writing this on the hill one day
Hmm.
with a bottle of scotch.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like
And
a
then paddling
real,
in the sea with Linda.
yeah, it seems autobiographical. It sure does. But yeah, I think to me, it also sounds very Beatley and just a great instrumentation too. Simple, but to the point. So that brings us
Did you
to,
see the video for this with Paul and Linda riding horses and then
uh,
paddling in the sea?
I think I have seen some of that.
It's
Yeah.
quite nice. It's available on YouTube, I think.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know why they made a single. I mean, why they made a video, because it wasn't released as a single.
Yeah, good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because they only released once, I think they only released one single from this album, uh, different one in England that was different than the United States, but I don't think they released more than that. So I don't know. Okay,
I have
another day was this.
I have a double-sided green apple single from Europe. I think it's France with Eat at Home on one side and Smile Away on the other,
Oh, okay.
which is quite interesting. So I
Hmm.
think Eat at Home was a single in certain European countries.
Wow. Okay. Well, the next song I find this to be a slightly controversial song, "Monk Mary Moon Delight." I'm surprised at how many people absolutely love this song because I hate this song. It's one of those situations where McCartney's got like one song on every album I just can't even stand, and this is it. I just think he tries too hard on this one. He's going so over the top. And I did a little research on this, and the term monkberry, I don't know if you're aware, his kids, one of them, instead of the word milk, they would say monk. So that's where that term monkberry came from. It was like a fantasy milkshake. And I guess the song was intended to be like a Lieber and Stoller song, which makes some sense to me. It's kind of a goofy comedy record. And that's why I can't take it too seriously because it's just too goofy for me. But some people love it. John Lennon even liked it, I think. He requested it on a radio program, I believe.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of zany. It goes on too long, but I think McCartney's singing it in his good rocking voice, and it does mention the town where I live, Budapest.
Ah.
So I like it for that. And it goes on a minute too long, but I think Linda's vocals are used effectively on this one, and yeah, I mean, it's difficult to make out what the words mean, and maybe they don't mean anything. And I've heard various interpretations about which I'm not going to go into. But as you say, yeah, I don't know if controversial is the right word, but it's pretty inexplicable, really. It's just a mad song. I mean, he's done worse than this. Let's face it.
Yes. Yeah, he has. He has. It's unique.
I can hear people. I can hear people jeering as was not praising this song.
Well, if it's just you and me on this video and nobody's watching anymore, that's okay, John. That's okay with me. Yeah,
I'm about the point where you can't criticize it a little. This track in particular seems to be one of those tracks.
Yeah, I guess it's controversial isn't the right word, but maybe it's just polarizing for some people. You either love it or hate it.
Think about all the people who don't speak English, who have gone through their entire lives listening to the Beatles and solo Beatles without having a clue, in some cases, what the hell is the lyrics are about. So to them, they're just hearing the sound of Paul singing, and you know, whether it's Monkberry Moon Delight or Back in the USSR, it doesn't make any difference to them.
Well, I guess
So
maybe
there's about 70% of the Beatles fans are probably non-English speakers. So you have to. Lyrics aren't everything.
Well, those are probably the people that appreciate his lyrics the most, then, because there's not. That's one of his the criticisms of his writing overall are some of his lyrics. So, but the next song, "Eat at Home," this is one of my favorites on the record. I think it's just a great, just honest song that he probably just knocked off with Linda and was just writing about his daily experiences.
Yeah, and it's quite Buddy Holly-like as well, and I think it's about the best track on the album, along with Too Many People. I really do. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I think didn't John say he liked this track as well?
Yeah, he did. I think it's one of the most positive songs on the album, and it's got an edge to it.
And in terms of who's doing the solos, I think it's to my ears, it's Paul doing the first solo and Dave Spinoza doing the second.
Ah, okay.
Dave Spinoza's got that very distinctive high pitch sound, which you hear on Mind Games as well.
Oh, okay.
So I can definitely tell it's him doing the second. So I would guess by implication it's Paul doing the first.
Okay.
Yeah, and Linda's vocals work well in this song, I think, as well.
Yeah, this one I think it works. I would prefer somebody else, but it works. Where it doesn't work.
John Lennon.
Well, I mean, anybody else, a female vocalist maybe that had good studio chops would be somebody I would take over Linda. Well, it does work on Eat at Home, but on the next song, Long Haired Lady, I believe her vocals do not work. And the song, it's got a couple different movements to it, but the Linda part is where she's got those little snotty vocals or those snotty responses. It's cringy to me, and there's some nice parts to the song, but all of it gets brought down with the Linda part, for me anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. This song is strange because the verses are charming, and there's a couple of tunes, as Bob Woofenden says in his book, there's a couple of decent tunes trying to get out,
Mm-hmm.
but they're kind of suffocated by those terrible lines from Linda at the beginning of the song and at the end of the song. She
Mm-hmm.
starts off the "Do you love me like you know you ought to do," uh, and then she ends it with the "Love is long" section, which for a start is too long. And secondly, why has he got Linda singing the lead vocal practically? And thirdly, why is he trying to copy Hey Jude with that ending? It's just yeah, it's a
Yeah,
real mixed bag, this song.
yeah, and he's starting to, yeah, he's fading a little on this album because then we don't have enough material. He has a reprise of Ram On up next, which did not need to be reprised, I don't believe. Um, I don't know. He's trying to do a little Sergeant Pepperish thing here, and this has all been done before. I don't know why he insists on trying to remake Sergeant Pepper Side 2 of Abbey Road, but he did that off and on through much of the 70s.
Yeah, he does. I mean, he really does. There's Venus and Mars. He uses that. Was the
Yep.
McCartney album with the Junk reprise. There's We're Open Tonight, coming back at the end of Back to the Egg. Bound on the Run at the end of Bound on the Run. It's almost without fail, isn't it? It's
Yeah, and I
strange.
mean,
But in terms of not having enough material, he did have those two tracks which were held over for Red Rose Speedway.
oh yeah.
One of which is not very good, Get on the Right Thing. But the other one, Little Lamb Dragonfly, I don't think it was properly worked out. But he had the basic tune, so he could have worked that up that for the album instead of Long Haired Lady.
And I personally, in America anyway, I guess we're just more used to having the singles on the album. By the 70s, I think that McCartney's, maybe people were they just buying his singles and not the album? I don't know, but it seems to me that one of those songs could have been on here or one of these songs could have been a B-side or something, one of the weaker songs. But he finishes the album with one of his strongest songs, I guess, Backseat of My Car. I think people would consider that to be one of his strong songs from his early period. And I can't disagree with that. What are your thoughts, John?
Well, I think it's a great melody, but I don't think it's very well produced. I think it's a bit of a mess production-wise, particularly at the end. He doesn't know how to end that song, and it goes on a minute too long. I don't know, that obviously that hook, that initial line is just brilliant and worthy of Abbey Road. I just think he missed a collaborator here to help him shape the song a little bit better. And I'm obviously thinking that John Lennon, if he had been there, would have done so. And I think George Martin famous quote from around the time was, "I don't think Yoko Ono is a substitute for Paul McCartney any much as I think Linda is a substitute for John." And that was a very honest comment, and it got him into trouble with, John and probably Paul were pissed off, but he was just speaking the truth.
Well, and it maybe got into trouble with those guys
anyway.
Yeah, but the fans probably loved hearing that because that's what all the fans were thinking, you know. Yeah, Backseat of My Car, the ending is a problem. Just like I think too many people, the ending of that song is a problem. Paul McCartney, for as good as he is as an arranger, he misses having a band here to flesh out some of these ideas. Because, after listening to so much of the Get Back, Let It Be sessions, and you hear how Ringo can take a song and just can keep working it, and people just follow him sometimes. He didn't have that here. So I think that's why some of these songs might falter at the end. And McCartney's typically a good finisher, but not on these two songs. And two of his best songs, too.
Yeah, it's funny about this not knowing how to finish a song, because he would have this problem on the next album as well, on Wildlife. I could think of at least 4 tracks which go on too long at the end.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, the title tracks, and People Never Know, and Dear Friend. So yeah, I think that early on he was a little bit insecure and missing that collaboration that the other Beatles would have given him. Although he was all very bravado, I'm on my own, I'm okay, kind of thing. But I think he was a little bit insecure, and he got knocked for six by the reviews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the other thing that he was up against in 70, 71, 72, like the other two Beatles, John and George, was that they didn't want to write 2.5 minute pop songs anymore. So what they ended up doing was stretching them out. You see this a lot on All Things Must Pass, where some of those songs are stretched out beyond what they need to be to flesh out an album and to make it appear that this is not me writing a hit single or Beatle George writing a single, a pop song. But these are pop songs, and you can't get away. They just couldn't get away from that, no matter how long they try to make them, and it just usually didn't work. Didn't work, and isn't it a pity either? Some of those George Harrison songs are
Yeah, no, I
much too
agree.
long.
I mean, isn't it a pity? The first version is too long, as you say, and the second version is completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
But then you have got examples of a perfect length song like Behind That Locked Door,
Mm-hmm.
and there's other songs like
Beware of Darkness. Be
Beware of
perfect.
Darkness, which are just perfection itself, and
Yep.
the opening track co-written with Dylan. So they're not all over long, but yeah,
That's true.
he's a bit guilty of that. But another thing I was going to say is I think the critics tended to think that George's and John's music was more serious, and this Paul was a bit throwaway because it didn't have a message, so-called message. What was he trying to say? What all he was trying to say is, I think, let's escape to the country. And apart from the stuff aimed at the other Beatles, he was just saying, I just need some peace and quiet away from the hustle and bustle of the city life. And I'm not into preaching politics. I'm not into preaching about God. That's not my bag. This is what I do. But I don't think it went down well at the time with the critics. I think the public probably didn't mind.
Yeah, I think the public totally understood what was going on with McCartney because they made it a #1 album here, number 2 here in the States, #1 in England. The critics were the ones that were the elitist, thinking everything had to be some kind of message that supported some kind of cause. And Harrison's didn't support a cause; that was just more spiritual. And Paul McCartney, he got hammered for that. But I mean, there's plenty of wonderful pop music that can just stay pop music. It doesn't all have to have a message. And the critics treated McCartney like it had to say more. So,
just while I remember when I met Yoko Ono here in Budapest 20 years ago, she made a remark about the McCartney album, saying, why did he have to play all the instruments? What was he trying to prove? And I think I made the remark because he was having a better time with Linda than he was with the other three Beatles.
You said that to her?
That's the only reason. Yeah, I did.
Wow. What was her response?
Well, she couldn't really argue, but then later on in the conversation, she said she hadn't even heard Bound on the Run. I said, what do you mean you haven't heard Bound on the Run? And Sam Havertoy was trying to remind her, Bound on the Run, Yoko, with Let Me Roll It. And Yoko said, nope, I don't know it. I was staggered.
Well, of course, she didn't know who the Beatles were when she met John Lennon either, so which is ridiculous to be in swing in London and all those circles and not know who they were. So I don't know. She's got a bit of a track record of forgetting.
So you think Another Day should have been on the album, do you?
Well, I mean, I personally think it fits well. I mean, it seems like it came obviously right out of those sessions. The whole feel of Another Day to me carries into the whole album. Quite frankly, one of my all-time favorite Paul McCartney songs is the B-side of Another Day, and that's Oh Woman, Oh Why. And I hate to see B-sides
Yeah.
wasted like that when it could have been on the album, probably made the album even stronger, as opposed, I'd switch that out for, um, I don't know, pick your track here, Smile Away or, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
Long Haired Lady. So I just think that's one of his strongest songs, one of his best rockers. Here's one thing that the critics, I don't know what they're thinking, but in comparison to John Lennon and George Harrison and John Lennon, Paul McCartney always had a rocker on one of his albums. He could always rock out. And George Harrison quit rocking out completely. John Lennon, he could do it here and there, but is that not rock and roll? I mean, why are these critics? Why don't they ever consider that to be edgy music or good rock music when McCartney does rock out like that? This B-side's a perfect example. So I don't know. They just selectively pick rip on him for what I did too, the fruity stuff. But I mean, they don't want to recognize the non-fruity stuff.
Well, I shouldn't think the critics even got around to listening to a B-side.
Yeah.
And it's funny that we say that this album has been reevaluated recently and now it's revered, whereas it wasn't before. But maybe the public all along, maybe the fans loved it every bit as much then as they do now. I mean, it came out when I was only 7, so I wouldn't know. But it would be interesting to hear some people who were alive at the time and who lived through the Beatles and what they thought of this album when it first came out.
Yeah, good point.
There's nothing like a first-hand account, is there? You don't have to listen to the Rolling Stone magazine all the time.
Well, I mean, like I say, it was number 2 in the United States, number 1 single in the United States, number 1 in the UK, and it went double platinum in the United States and platinum in Canada. So it couldn't have been, I mean, people liked it. I mean, they wouldn't have bought it otherwise. I mean, that's a very successful album. So it's just been, history has told the story of this album. I mean, I can see why Wildlife gets hammered, but this album I just don't think deserves it. Are you ready to move on to Linda?
Yeah. Yeah, and just before we do that, I think one other reason why the critics slagged it off is because a lot of people blamed Paul for the breakup, because that's how the public perceived it. I know that everyone knows that John was the one who left first now, but at the time, with Paul taking them all to court, he was definitely seen as the bad guy, and people really resented that. This was you imagine the Beatles splitting up when you're 14 years old and you were a real fan. It was literally like a family tragedy.
Yeah, I think it just goes to show you how unprofessional journalism was even in those days when they could not they couldn't keep their biases out. I mean, even if McCartney was the culprit in breaking up the Beatles, I mean, you have to review the album balanced, and they could not do that.
Yeah, and I think well, this brings us on nicely to the Linda topic, because I think Paul was giving a little bit of ammunition to the critics there with having Linda in such a prominent member of this album, and with the early Wings, he was almost inviting them to snipe.
And I think he put her in a really tough position because she's not obviously she's not a musician, she's not a studio level singer. And although she had to work, I'm sure, very hard through that whole decade and I think she did get better. But I mean, it's not easy to do that. You can't just go in and start singing great backing vocals behind Paul McCartney. But I agree with you. I think he really opened himself up there to some criticism. And for the life of me, I just could never understand why these ex-Beatles insist on shoving their wives on us. But I furthermore didn't understand why McCartney, who was this perfectionist, would use his wife all through his career, who clearly isn't very good. I mean, let me read you a quote here, because I've noticed Linda, her singing, she sings flat. And there's a couple songs where it's really prominent. Now, here's something that Paul said about Linda on this album. Quote, "I tell you, I worked her on that album because she hadn't done an awful lot, so it's a little bit out of tune. We were pleased with the results. It just meant we really forced it. So he was putting her in a tough position, and like I don't think I think some people say that it adds to the charm of the album. I can see that, but it also adds to the banality of some of the songs. So I think she's a double-edged sword. I mean, I don't think she across the board improves this album, not at all. But I can see where some people might say, well, it's cute and fitting, you know.
Yeah, but having said that, I like some of the vocal arrangements that presumably Paul wrote for her, particularly on Monkberry Moon Delight. Those I think that's really clever, and it works. And on Smile Away, although I don't much like the song, I think learning how to do it. But that's quite a clever vocal part he wrote for her. Obviously, on Long Haired Lady, it's less successful, as we've mentioned.
You know, even when I see Linda on stage playing, she just doesn't look comfortable. She doesn't move like a musician. She just, you know, I give her credit for doing it because it's like I said, it's not easy to do. But I don't know. I just think Paul would have been better off if he needed a female vocal to get some professionals in there and work them the way he really wanted to work them, like he would any other musician. So I think that's another reason why this album maybe gets hammered because she got top billing.
It's funny you say that because I can't really imagine seeing a Wings. Imagine. I mean, you were suggesting having Clyde King or Katie Kassoon or one of those women, or some of the women that Bob Dylan uses as backing singers would have been more professional maybe, but it just wouldn't have been Wings. Wings was Paul and Linda with Denny, like it or lump it. And he put her in the band because he wanted to be with her and he wanted the family to stay together. He took the kids on tour. You know, it was the opposite of what the Stones were doing with their groupie lifestyle and whatever.
Yeah.
Just the complete opposite. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't party on tour, but he certainly didn't indulge in outside of the family.
Yeah, that's admirable, but I think the music suffered. I mean, if you're going to put the music first, can you imagine if the Stones took their family along in the 70s? The music wouldn't be the same. You know, I think this music did suffer because of it, admirable though it is.
Well, I think you said earlier in our last chat that you think Band on the Run is his best work. Well, that album didn't suffer from. Linda was only one of 3 people on that album, and I think it works perfectly.
Yeah, that's his strongest album, I think. But Linda seems to be used in a much more efficient and palatable way, to my ears anyway. I just think it took some time for him to maybe understand how to integrate her in, and by then he had gotten it. I mean, I don't find her offensive on that album. I find, I'll give you a perfect example of where she is singing out of tune. It's the end. It's when she's singing on the song Big Barn Bed from Red Rose Speedway. She is flat. Now you can listen to the album. She's flat there. Listen to, if you want to, it's actually quite astounding that this was allowed to go on. But if you listen to the 1973 TV show, James Paul McCartney, she sounds pretty bad. And she's doing a live vocal. And not only is she flat, but it just sounds bad. So if somebody wants to understand what I'm talking about, that's all you need to see. All I can say is he must have really loved her.
I'm a big fan of the Denny Lane, Linda McCartney backing vocal combination. I think it was pretty unique, and on something like Live and Let Die and all those other tracks with a little luck, I think it works really, really very well indeed.
Yeah, I agree. I think
sort of gave it their sound. Maybe it sounds like Wings. Sounds like Wings. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Denny Lane's vocals really meld well with hers. It tones her down when they're together, which I find a lot more pleasing. The next thing I wanted to ask you about and talk about is in this retrospective reviewing of Ram, people call it the first indie album. There's a couple writers that have suggested that Stephen Thomas Erlewine called it that, and Pitchfork's Jason Green as well. And I always just felt that was a propping up of this album that it didn't need and didn't deserve. Indie rock is really, this is not indie rock or indie pop. I mean, that's more based on its post punk, and I've got some quotes here by some people calling it, the rebellious screaming of early punk. And then indie pop defines itself against charting pop. So the fact that this was a huge hit, album wise and single wise, that's not indie. Likewise, you're on some kind of small little label, I mean, this is not some poor guy pushing his stuff. This is, just happens to be in the country. So I don't know. I think that was just a copy paste thing, and everybody just says, "Oh, it's the first indie album." I don't buy it.
But what's the definition of an indie album then? Educate me.
Well, here's one by Emily Dolan. She says, "Indie is predicated on the distorted music of the Velvet Underground and rebellious screaming of early punk." Now that's the term indie. So we have indie rock and indie pop. So this would maybe, I think, be called more indie pop, but that's also derivative of the punk scene. So music critic Simon Reynolds says that indie pop defines itself against charting pop. So basically, these are grassroots type of songs that don't become hits. Bands like REM, the Pixies, Replacements, the college bands of the 80s, that was considered indie rock, indie pop. And I just don't see how this really has anything to do with that. So I just think that's just people propping it up where it doesn't need to be. Trying to give it some cred that it doesn't have.
Isn't it just another pretentious label like prog rock, which we don't really need? I mean, okay, so Ram is different from the music that was coming out at the time, but it doesn't make it necessarily good. I mean, or special. It was, I don't know, really, don't really spend much time talking about things like indie or prog. Because I think we just go around in circles.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things that people have labeled this album as, and as a way to praise it, as if it's the first of its kind or something. And it isn't. And that's one of the things that you see with, I think not just the Beatles or McCartney, but they retrospectively try to label it as something that it really isn't.
It's not the first time I've disagreed with Stephen Thomas Erlewine. I find some of his writing a bit annoying, and apart from the fact he's got a thoroughly pretentious name,
he does.
Just doesn't help.
He does. I look at McCartney's his whole catalog. If I look at the decade of the '70s, this is kind of the high point of the pre Band on the Run era, I guess. This and maybe Red Rose Speedway. I mean, he took him. I think it took McCartney a while to figure out his solo, what he was solo, and this is still kind of an experimental area. This album always sounded a little bit experimental to me as well.
It's also interesting why he credited it to Paul and Linda. Was it to get back at John and Yoko, or was it to? Because they had this debate about the songwriting, and Lou Gray didn't believe him when he said Linda co-wrote the songs.
Yeah,
maybe that was a way to justify, but by giving her credit on the album title, then you say, yeah, she did write the songs, and if you don't believe me, that's your problem. But it's it's not as if they were equals. It's a little bit strange, isn't it?
Yeah, I always thought that for her to get equal billing, I thought it was a bit much. I mean, she co-wrote a few songs, not everything on the album, and obviously there was a monetary advantage to doing it the way they did. I'm sure that was not missed by McCartney either, but whatever. I don't have a problem with it. I don't know. Does her name belong as big as should it be in as big of letters as Paul McCartney on the album cover? Well, probably not, but Should Yoko Ono's? No. So again, these Beatles shoving their wives on us.
Well, at least George didn't shove Patty on us or Olivia, did he?
Yeah, that is true. But one of the things I wanted to mention was that, this album, because this was in the heart of that singer-songwriter period, and McCartney doesn't really fall into that genre at all. He's not like a Joni Mitchell or a Cat Stevens or a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. He gets, and he's not in the cool rock. He's not in that Jethro Tull, Eagles. He's more in the middle of the road category, and I think that's appropriate. But I think this album is every bit as honest as Plastic Ono Band. And I don't think that's dishonest at all, just because it seems more lightweight. And I think I watched this, or I listened to this podcast called Nothing Is Real. It's Stephen Cockcroft and Jason Carty. And when they talked about McCartney's solo career, they suggest that his solo material is best appreciated retrospectively. And that always stuck with me. I think that's a very, very interesting thing to say, because I think that the reason why it's taken much longer for this album to get credit is I think it's taken McCartney fans the length of a solo career to understand his depth. Because on first blush, Ram doesn't seem deep. But if you talk to McCartney fans today who like Ram, they find depth in it. I think it's because McCartney, his music is hard to get the depth out of it unless you have listened to him for a long time. I think that hurt. I think that's why he was panned a lot early on, called lightweight. I don't think his music is not deep. It just takes a little bit to understand the depth. And not everybody maybe has the patience for that. And I would consider myself in that category. I didn't have the patience to really try to find the depth. And I think that's one of the reasons it's taken so long to get the accord that it's getting now.
Well, you can spend decades looking for depth in the lyrics of Smile Away, but you're never going to find them.
Yeah, some songs you're not going to find it. But yeah, I mean, you hear these people just love this album, and it connects with them.
Yeah, you did. I think Q Magazine recently said this album is still frustratingly uneven, which is quite a fair way of looking at it. It's not perfection. But it is, it's got some bloody good stuff on it, and he's compared to virtually anything he's done post Tug of War, it wins hands down, obviously. Well, I don't say obviously, because there are people out there who defend Egypt Station and New as if they were golden nuggets.
I struggle with some of the McCartney fans, especially the ones who equate the quality of Paul's, 80s and 90s work with his 70s work. But anyway, that's a topic for another video.
I mean, maybe we're all biased because we tend to get attached to stuff we listened to when we were growing up. So yeah. When I got into the Beatles, it was 1978. So it was all the Wings stuff I got into first, and Ram as well, of course. And then by the time Tug of War came out, I was 18. So as you get older, you get albums coming out becomes less important part of your life. So maybe some people who were 14 in 1997 when Flaming Pie came out, maybe they've got memories of that the same as I have of London Town, for example. So there's that factor to consider.
Yeah, it seems to be getting a lot of younger fans as well. So maybe that's why they're calling it an indie album. I don't know. But it seems to have legs, as they say.
It got 3 legs, or is it 4?
Well, maybe by now there's 4. I don't know.
That is a hilarious image of my dog. He got 3 legs. I mean, George and Ringo and John must have been absolutely livid when they heard 3 legs. Because it's not a pleasant lyric, is it?
No. They kind of had it coming, though. It's too bad. I think one of the things, one last thing here, one critique of this album, I just don't think that the Beatles, in writing about other Beatles negatively, reflects well on any of them. I think it seems petty. I think it some of the lyrical content of all those songs suffer. John and George as well, their songs, and yeah, I just would rather them keep that stuff to themselves.
But having said that, it's bloody interesting historically, isn't it? To listen to this album and then see how it led to How Do You Sleep, and even an interview with Ringo at the time saying he had not enjoyed McCartney and he did not like Ram. He said he didn't think there was one worthwhile tune on the whole album. He seems to be wasting his time.
Yeah, he said Paul has gone.
Harsh.
I think he said Paul has gone strange. But yeah, Ringo and Paul had
strange.
They had a little bit of a falling out there for at least a while. So I thought Ringo was a little too harsh on this record, but you know, he probably would not say so now.
Well, they did meet at Mick Jagger's wedding down in Saint-Tropez in May of '71, just when this album was coming out. So that was the first time they'd seen each other for a couple of years.
Okay.
So they started to rebuild their friendship then, I think.
Yeah, maybe so. Over a couple of drinks, I would imagine.
Yes.
That would have been a party. Mick and Bianca's wedding. Oh man. Okay,
I was down in that part of France last summer, and we were staying right next to the village where the Stones recorded Exile on Main Street. So we gazed across the bay at the mansion and were tempted to swim across and try and break in, but we didn't.
Oh, very good. Well, John, what do you say we do another video collaboration on a review of a solo Beatles song? Yes, I thought now that we've got this one done, we go over to a John Lennon album, and I think we discussed Sometime in New York City.
Oh yes,
that could be a fun one. You're
going to pick the ones which are not your favorites, right? Okay.
Well, you play good cop, I'll play bad cop.
Let's
How about
go
that? For it. Yeah, because I think
I don't know if I can defend. I can't defend all that scumbag stuff on side 4.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll come to it when we come to it.
Maybe
the secret is not to treat it as a double album, because it's a bit like All Things Must Pass is not really a triple, it's a double with a bonus disc. And same thing, Sometime in New York City. I don't listen to the live sides at all.
Yeah.
Literally never. Even well. But anyway, this is for another video.
Yeah. Good backstory on that album, so it'll take a little discussion, but fascinating. All right, John. Well, thanks for calling me up and suggesting we do something. I really enjoyed this. Let's see how these go, and we'll maybe do a series here together. And it's nice to have somebody else to have a discussion with, particularly the solo Beatles, because you've got a solid background, probably better than me. So it's good to pool our resources.
Yeah, and I assume you've been enjoying all the new Let It Be stuff on Spotify now this weekend.
Yeah, just got
absorbing it all slowly.
I am indeed. Just was listening before. I just got my box in the mail today, the LP set, which is really fun, and a lot more to talk about. I can't believe how much mileage everybody's getting out of this Get Back thing, but the Beatles are endlessly fascinating.
All right, Matt, thanks a lot for inviting me, and it was good stuff, and we'll do it again. Take care, and see you next time.
Okay, thank you, John. Take care.
Heart of the country,